Greetings to all of you. I am about to show you a video I did about a month ago with Emilio Ortiz on his YouTube channel, Just Tap In. I'm putting this on my channel so that those of you who didn't get a chance to see it might be able to watch it. In this conversation, I talk about the significance of our moving out of this time of the Kali Yuga and the shifts that we're in and how that may evolve across the next several years. But I really also am wanting to honor and support Emilio in his work. He's on his own spiritual path and path of wisdom. I have a great deal of respect for him, for his authenticity, his depth, his capacity to listen and be in deep conversation. And he, on his channel, is trying to tap into conversations with those who are in the process of trying to support us in moving into the Aquarian age and co-creating this new earth together. So I'm putting the link to his YouTube channel below. I encourage you to check out his work and his conversations with others. And here's my conversation with him. Blessings to all of you. It's been fascinating to me to be exploring these larger cycles of our human history and evolution of consciousness. I see this time between 2025 and 2032 as the critical transition time. And I think if enough of us aren't moving into that higher consciousness and into those new paradigms, then my sense is we may experience a dimensional divide. And those of us on a path of consciousness will transmute and transform with the earth. And those who need to go through the change in the third dimensional reality may go through that process. Part of our paradigm now is that we're each on this journey of separation, individuation, to be, in that competition with others, to be the best, to find our way to the top. To me, it's such a message to us. People, wake up, connect to source. Come back into alignment with your soul self, with cosmic consciousness. Be in that journey of healing, coming back into wholeness, to then, in the next cycle, June of 2032, move into higher consciousness, moving into new forms.
Heather Ensworth, welcome on Just Tap In. What are you most excited about right now in your life?
Thank you for inviting me to do this, Emilio. I am excited to be in this conversation with you about this profound time that we're in on the planet. We've all chosen to incarnate here in this time, and it is such a powerful time of transformation and transmutation.
And I think by now we've all heard that there's a shift coming. It's the end of a cycle. Something's going on. But actually, you're one of the few people that are actually putting a date into this start point of the new cycle, the end of what the Vedas call the Kali Yuga. And you're saying that the end of March of 2025 is a time when we're fully moving out of this descent of consciousness and starting to rise back up again. So just to give a little bit of context as to where we are in this great cycle, what have you seen and what has come through for you that is maybe new? Because I know you've also revised your book recently, your first book around these cycles. And I know you've done a lot of research preparation around this. So what has come up to the surface as you understand more about what the Kali Yuga really meant for us and why we're moving out of that right now?
It's a great question, Emilio. It's been fascinating to me to be exploring these larger cycles of our human history and evolution of consciousness, the processional cycle, and also known as the Hindu Yuga cycle. And it's Bibhu Dev Misra, his work on the Yuga shift. Brilliant book where he's really tracked that Hindu Yuga cycle and how the Kali Yuga is ending at the end of March 2025. And for me, the two cycles are synonymous, the precessional cycle and the Yuga cycle. And it's when you really begin to explore that cycle and the journey of ascending and descending consciousness that we go through, it radically changes our whole understanding of history. Our whole modern Western sense of history, that we're on this linear path of progression and that we're now at the height of our advanced consciousness as a species, is just not true. And you and I have visited Egypt. We've seen some of these ancient sacred sites, some of which date back 12,000 years to the time when we were at a more advanced level of consciousness on the planet. And I think a lot of those ancient cultures were encoding in stone, in their monuments, messages for us in this time, to guide us to remember these larger cycles and shifts, to help us wake up, to help us know that we're on the cusp of a profound evolutionary leap as humanity, if we choose to work with the energies guiding us into that. But we have free will. I think this is a karmic choice point for all of us. But we've come out of 5,000 or 6,000 years of the Kali Yuga, which is known as the time of forgetting, where we get caught in disconnection from each other, from the earth, from the consciousness of the cosmos. And we're now in a time of remembering, awakening, with the opportunity to heal and transform and move into higher consciousness.
Heather, I wanted to ask you, because you've done so much study and actually embodied a lot of these practices, what does it mean to be a wisdom keeper right now on the planet?
I think, Emilio, that many of us, my sense from a lot of the people that I do readings with, when I listen to you, I feel like there are many of us who have been here in much earlier times on the planet, who have some memory of that ancient wisdom. And indigenous cultures have retained their lineage and connection to that to a great extent. But some of us are coming back in this time with that remembrance of these cycles, of what it means to be in higher consciousness, to come back into harmony, come back into right relationship with each other and all that is. And I think we've come to hold that wisdom and that energetic to help seed it on the planet and support the shifts in this time. That's what I see as my path and purpose, and am doing my best to be in alignment with that.
And in your 20s and 30s, you were working actually as a clinical psychologist with your own practice. And it was the year 1993 where you had a profound mystical experience, and there was an inner voice in your head that said, you need to leave your life as you have known it, or you will die. I'm wondering if this mystical experience that you had back then connects at all with this remembrance of us coming back to do this again in this rise of consciousness. Was there a connection there? Did you come out of this mystical experience with that knowing that you just described?
That's a great question. Interestingly, I came into this incarnation, my earliest memories were of speaking this other language, having this little play telephone as a little toddler, really trying to call home.
E.T. phone home.
And going into these great conversations with my spirit guides or whoever from the other realms, and then being a 3-year-old wandering after my parents saying, what happens after we die? What happens? So I feel like I came in on this spiritual path from my earliest memories. I would go out in the woods with my stuffed animals and share with them about God and about consciousness in the way that I understood it as a child. So I was always on that path. And when I was in clinical psychology, it was about wanting to bring healing to others, particularly those who'd had a lot of trauma. And I was in a program that was trying to integrate spirituality and psychology, but I really felt like I'd gotten caught in the limitations of that and those models. And that's when I had that mystical experience, which actually was profound in that it catapulted me off any conventional professional path into being in this liminal space. I left my life as I had known it, stepped out of that. I was in a very successful practice, stepped out of that, sold my home, moved across the country to, I had no clue what I was going to, just that I was meant to leave all of that behind. And it actually started me on this profound process of my own inner transformation. And that's when I just started following whatever I felt guided to explore. That's when I started studying shamanism and ancient wisdom traditions and other approaches to healing to end up synthesizing what I integrate today. But it was very much, and I think was my microcosmic experience of what we're going through on the macrocosm right now. To be willing to leave the old paradigms behind, to be in the mystery, in the not knowing of what's going to emerge, but to trust being in that process, like the caterpillar and the chrysalis, dissolving to emerge as the butterfly, but without knowing what that form is going to look like. We're in that time of transition and mystery.
I'll share with you a synchronicity because I was invited to be an MC for an online conference a few months ago called The Awakening of Humanity. And the speakers of the conference were randomly given to certain MCs. There was many of us. And one of those speakers that I was going to introduce was Bibu Dev Misra. And I did not know about his work before. And, I was just digging into a little bit to, write the introduction for him. And when I listened to his talk, he was showing that we are in that transition right now from ending the Kali Yuga into something else. Before the new age, there's like a time, like there's a space of time of that transition. I'm wondering how you have perceived it or what you have understood about this time between the mystery that you just, briefly touched upon. There's a lot of maybe fear around that because we're hearing about the pole shifts and then, the earth changes and the splitting and all these different things. But how have you understood what this transition really means for us right now?
We are in the mystery and the not knowing, and I do think it's a karmic choice point. I truly believe that we are being guided by the energies of the earth and the cosmos into this time of transition and transformation, but we're co-creators with it. And my sense is, and when I studied with the Peruvian shamans that I worked with, they talked about this as the time of the Pachacuti, of the world turning upside down. But really what they meant is we're supposed to be transforming our consciousness. And I truly believe that's what this transition is meant to be about. But I feel if enough of us don't awaken, and the shamans would talk about this too, if enough of us don't move into that higher consciousness and work with these energies of transition and transformation, if we resist that, then I think the earth will guide us through a cataclysmic reset, as it did 12,000 years ago, to help us start anew help us come back into balance, help us heal. But I truly believe we can move through this time into higher consciousness to co-create a new earth together. And that's what's meant to happen. And my strong belief is if enough of us aren't participating in that transition, which I have a different sense of the timing of that than Bhivu. I have profound respect for his work. But I see this time between 2025 and 2032 as the critical transition time, a critical choice point. And I think if enough of us aren't moving into that higher consciousness and into those new paradigms, then my sense is we may experience a dimensional divide. And those of us on a path of consciousness will transmute and transform with the earth, who's in her own ascension process right now, and those who need to go through the change in the third dimensional reality may go through that process.
Have we had any examples from ancient cultures or ancient civilizations about what a dimensional divide was like? I know you're very close to speaking with the traditions of Lemuria. What does that even mean for a civilization or a planet to go through a dimensional divide?
Well, I love talking to Keone Hanalei about that because his strong belief is that Lemuria is still here. It's just in a different dimension. And we also know that the Mayans seem to disappear. And there are other ancient cultures that seem to have just gone into some other dimension. And my sense is they can witness what's going on in our third dimensional reality, but we can't see them because we're not at a high enough level of frequency, a high enough level of consciousness. But Keone and others talk about how as we move more into that fifth dimensional frequency and higher consciousness, then these other worlds will reappear again because we will then be able to meet them at that level of vibration, that level of consciousness.
I was just in the Sierra Nevada of Colombia these past few days, and since there's not of artificial light, you could really clearly look up to the sky and see all the stars. And I was like, oh, there's Orion. It was the first one that I saw in the sky, and obviously Sirius being the brightest star in the sky, it was the clearest one that I saw. And I know you've talked a lot about the constellation of Orion representing the journey of humanity, and there are others saying the same. My friend Robert Edward Grant. How do you break that down in terms of what Orion represents to us as humanity, as a species, and what can we learn about the story of Orion when it comes to what we're moving through right now?
I think that's so important, and I know Robert Edward Grant has talked about that, as has Rob Comer. I think it's really significant, the stories that the stars hold and give to us. And I think the constellation Orion and its opposition with the constellation Ophiuchus are very important. Ophiuchus is that constellation that is above the galactic center, that dark rift in the Milky Way that ancient cultures knew was that womb of our galaxy, the source of all that is. And Ophiuchus is that constellation of the serpent bearer, a great healer who integrates the wisdom of the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine to be in wholeness. The serpent is one of the most ancient symbols of the sacred feminine. And it's opposite in the sky Orion. So Orion is opposite the galactic center and is so associated, as you know, with the story of Osiris and Isis. And that's such a profound metaphor for our journey through our evolution of consciousness as humanity.
because it's the story of Isis and Osiris being these highly conscious leaders guiding the people to live in right harmony, in unity with all that is. And then Osiris's brother, Set, gets caught in ego, competition, wants to have power, gets in this ongoing power struggle with his brother Osiris, ends up killing him, cutting him into pieces over and over again. And it's the story of each time Isis, in her love, in her healing energy, finds Osiris, pieces him back together again, makes him whole again. And Isis is associated with the star Sirius, the brightest star in our sky, and the star that I believe is our binary star, guiding us through this 24,000 year precession cycle. So it's such a metaphor for how she's guiding us through this process, lovingly healing us and helping us come back together again after we go through these periods of lower consciousness and get caught in our power struggles and division and polarization and destruction. And that's where we are now. And we're seeing on the planet, from my perspective, some of the darkest aspects of humanity playing out. Division, war, violence, power over, destruction. And we're seeing so many awakening, healing, and glimpsing what we can move into together. So I truly believe those stars of Orion are speaking to us of this journey that we're in. And as you probably know, 12,000 years ago, Orion was at its lowest declination, close to the horizon. Now it's at its highest. And part of why I think 2032 is so significant is that in June of 2032, when Saturn and Uranus move into a conjunction together, marking new patterns, new forms, new ways of being, they will literally in the sky be in the upraised arm of Orion, which to me is symbolic of resurrection, moving into new forms, new ways of being. 44 years ago, when they started their last cycle together, they were conjunct the galactic center in 1988. In June of 2032, they'll be in the upraised arm of Orion. To me, it's such a message to us. 1988, people wake up, connect to source, come back into alignment with your soul self, with cosmic consciousness. Be in that journey of healing, coming back into wholeness, to then in the next cycle, June of 2032, move into higher consciousness, resurrection, moving into new forms.
Hello, beautiful family. Quick one today. I just wanted to take a moment to thank each and every one of you that have subscribed to this channel. Your subscription means more than you know. Even though it's free, what you're doing is you're empowering a whole channel to be able to do this every single day and continue showing up in the way that we can with all of our resources on hand. Thank you for contributing to the growth of this channel, for sharing it with the people that you love, for creating a conscious movement of individuals that are seeking the sovereignty and the divinity of their soul. This is why we're here. And if you haven't already and you're enjoying this content, I invite you now to look below on that little button that says subscribe and welcome you properly to this community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being who you are and being pure love and radiating that with everyone that you see. Back to the episode. Yeah. And because you also mentioned Isis, which represents the divine feminine, that would mean that the divine feminine plays such a huge role
Beautiful.
in moving humanity out of this descent into an ascension of consciousness, Why is the feminine, in your perspective, so closely tied together with helping us to wake up to the greater nature of who we are, our soul self, and moving us through these cycles as well?
Part of what was really transformational for me when I was in that journey of exploration and my own healing and transformation after that mystical experience, one of the things that I just started exploring is ancient sacred feminine wisdom. And I started to realize if you trace back to the age of Taurus, which was about 4,000 to 2,000 BCE, that was the time where the sacred feminine was still prominent in cultures. And you look at Maria Gimbutas's work and other archaeologists from that time, there was no evidence of war. The cities or villages didn't have fortifications and protection. It was a time of creativity. It was a time of community. It was a time where we weren't living in that kind of war and violence that's become a part of our history these last 5,000 years. And I started to realize, and Bhikkhu Deb Misra talks about this, for most of our cycle of that 24,000 years of precession, we're in an integration of the sacred feminine and sacred masculine. It's only in the Kali Yuga, the time of the lowest level of consciousness, that we get caught in patriarchal paradigms. So to move out of this time of disconnection and forgetting into higher consciousness, we need to reclaim the wisdom of the sacred feminine, which guides us into what it means to be in right relationship, be in right harmony, right balance with all that is. It's the sacred feminine wisdom that reminds us that everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent. It takes us out of that over-idealization of separation and individuation back into connection, back into right relationship.
You said that at our lowest point, we fall into patriarchal paradigms and structures and ways of being. What does it mean to be in matriarchal paradigms? And what examples do we have of that, maybe in today's society that is emerging right now that we're seeing, or in past civilizations as well?
What's interesting is because we've been in this paradigm of patriarchy, we think, oh, if the sacred feminine is prominent, then it's matriarchal culture with the women in the power over dynamic. But that's not how it was. They were matrilineal cultures honoring the sacred feminine as the source of life. There was that honoring of our galactic center as the womb of the great goddess, giving birth to everything in our galaxy, and honoring of that sacred feminine wisdom that it's out of the womb that we each emerge into our lives here on the earth. So it's an honoring of the sacred feminine, but it's not a matriarchal paradigm where women are then trying to be in a power over position. It's actually about community and collaboration, but the honoring that it is the sacred feminine wisdom that holds that understanding of the generational process. So many indigenous cultures understand that meaning of, is this good for 7 generations from now? And the circle of grandmothers who guide the tribe or the culture in making decisions to be staying in right harmony with what's best for those who are coming after us. That's sacred feminine wisdom.
I want to go back for a moment when you mentioned that our binary star, Sirius, is responsible for guiding us through these possessional cycles. What does it mean to be in a binary star system, and how does that change completely the paradigm of us moving around the sun in our Milky Way galaxy? What changes there in terms of our perspective of our place in the galaxy?
Oh, that is such a great question. I love that question because to me, part of our patriarchal paradigm is the solar hero, the sun in the center of our solar system with all the planets circling around the sun. But if you realize our sun is part of a binary star system in this dance, in this partnership with Sirius, it's all about relationship. Instead of, part of our paradigm now is that we're each on this journey of separation, individuation to be, in that competition with others, to be the best, find our way to the top. Think of how different it changes it completely restructures our cosmology. If we start with this awareness that we come from this relationship with our sun, our star, and another star, that they're in this dance together, shaping each other, influencing each other, creating our consciousness here on this planet. It reminds us to come back into relationship and to realize we are formed and shaped in relationship.
When did you first find evidence of our relationship to Sirius?
I really was impacted by Walter Cruttenden's research. He's the one that originally started exploring what would be the root cause of our precessional cycle. And why are we in these shifting ages and how they shape our consciousness on the planet. And he started to realize that 80% of stars in our universe are binary stars. Why wouldn't our sun be a binary star? He's exploring different options for what that might be, but I strongly believe that it is Sirius, our brightest star, and that it's significant that so many ancient cultures speak about Sirius in their mythology as this really primary energy that's influencing us, just like Isis in Egyptian mythology.
Yeah. And what does that say about our connection then to our maybe galactic neighbors? If we're talking about a whole different star system, what does that say about our relationship to maybe a civilization from Sirius or somewhere else as well?
Absolutely. I believe that we really are being guided and watched over by our galactic family, and those from Sirius, those from the Pleiades in particular. And I think some of Sedna coming into our consciousness, that Oort cloud planetary body, is reminding us of our connection with the stars. She journeys all the way out to the edges of our solar system, communing with the other stars, and then comes back in close to our inner solar system. So I think there are a lot of ways in which we are being more and more reminded that we are connected with the stars, with these other galactic beings. But we need to heal and come back into balance and harmony with each other in order to be safe, to be coming back into more direct relationship with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it wouldn't make sense for us to open up contact with other civilizations if we can't be friends with each other first.
Exactly. We're kind of in a timeout here on Earth to see if we can get our act together.
Yeah. And when we talk about these planetary shifts, these celestial shifts, how could they alter our perception of what is real? We're talking about also, living through a solar maximum year, 2025, where the sun is bursting out these M-class flares, hitting us with cosmic information. How would that then be affecting our perception of reality itself? Maybe going into a new iteration, a new version of a human. If we're seeing reality different, then that means that we're no longer the same human. So how have you found that these planet shifts can alter our perception of what is real?
I think that is so important. I think that these solar energies that we're being bombarded by now with the solar maximum, the fact that our solar system is moving through this galactic sheet, this part of our galaxy that means we're getting more inundated by energies from the galactic center also. And I don't know if you've seen the recent images from the Webb telescope of the flares coming to us from the galactic center. I love that. So we're getting these cosmic energies, solar energies that I think are both activating that latent DNA within us, are activating our pineal glands, are expanding our consciousness, are calling us into transformation physically, emotionally, and spiritually, which is why I think it's so important. In a lot of my videos, I talk about the importance for us to heal, for us to clear what's blocking us emotionally, energetically, so that we can integrate these energies coming in that are activating us to expand spiritually, to become telepathic again, to increase our psychic abilities, to change us physically. But the more that we can clear and be preparing ourselves for that, the more we can integrate that and really be in that transformation process.
Yeah. And what I found is that it's so hard to integrate anything if we're still holding on to things from the past. And this is a very interesting intersection point between psychology and spirituality, maybe astrology as well, and the processional shifts that we've been talking about, where I know you've specialized in trauma as a clinical psychologist. So I wanted to ask you there, how does trauma play into maybe this expansion of consciousness that we can move through, that we can integrate? Maybe even also the dimensional divide that we spoke to in the beginning. What is the role of trauma in all of these shifts in consciousness that we're ready to receive, but maybe there's something there, that there's this trauma that might affect that in some way?
That is such an important question because, in my work in clinical psychology, it becomes so clear that when we haven't healed the trauma from the past, we get locked into survival patterns. We get locked into those ways that were adaptive at the time of the trauma that we use to cope, to keep ourselves protected, to try to be safe. But they become patterns that we get locked into that then later in life become dysfunctional or constrict us or bind us. And as we can heal that past trauma and release it, then we can open to new ways of being and be more in the present moment. And I know you've interviewed Barbara Hand-Clow, and she talks brilliantly in her book that was originally called Catastrophobia. Now it's, I think, Awakening the Planetary Mind, about how we carry collective PTSD, collective trauma around that cataclysm that happened 12,000 years ago. Every midpoint of the precessional cycle and ending and beginning of a new one, where we are now, every 12,000 years we're at this critical choice point as humanity. And we went through a cataclysm 12,000 years ago. And I think we carry that trauma in our DNA. And if we can't clear that at the collective level, then we tend to not only get caught in these survival patterns, but then part of what I realized also in my work with trauma is we tend to unconsciously reenact the very thing that we fear. And I feel like we as humanity...
Why does that happen?
What I realized is, first of all, from a shamanic perspective, I did a lot of years of study with Alberto Villoldo and his Healing the Light Body program. And one of the things he used to talk about is that we carry trauma in our energy field. And in particular, we carry trauma in our second chakra. He said, we're always walking into our trauma. Those stories are embedded in our energy field, and we tend to then attract those same patterns into our lives if we don't clear it energetically as well as emotionally. And from a psychological perspective, part of what I realized is people are often caught in the same pattern with the unconscious hope that maybe I can work it and change it and heal it this time. But instead, we tend to just re-traumatize ourselves. And I think what we're seeing on the planet right now is when we're caught in that unconscious fear of chaos, cataclysm, death, we're actually on our own path of self-destruction as humanity right now. So if we can wake up and heal and release that trauma, then we can see more clearly the patterns that we're in and move in a new direction and be open to the energies that are calling us into healing and higher consciousness.
Wow. It's like, as Dr. Joe Dispenza says, where you place your energy, your attention is where you place your energy. If we are constantly trying to prevent our own self-destruction, not only individually, but as a collective, we're walking toward that path because we're placing our attention on it. So you mentioned that consciousness itself has the capability to prevent a great cataclysm again. How do we do that without thinking always like, we need to stop this cataclysm from coming, we need to stop this meteor from coming in whatever, how many years? Like, how do we shift away from that and let consciousness do its work and naturally shift us to a different timeline?
Do you remember what it felt like being in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid?
I can never forget.
And did you get in a sarcophagus?
Yes, I did.
And did you feel and have that sense energetically that that was a place for profound initiation?
Mm-hmm.
Where people were called to be in the sarcophagus, to face the fear of their own death, to reclaim a deeper connection with their soul self, to come back into this incarnational lifetime, no longer afraid of death. All the great mystery schools were about that kind of initiation. Because when we can remember we're a part of an infinity, we're a soul self having this human experience. When we can move beyond the fear of death, physical death, then we can be in that place of higher consciousness and heal and no longer be caught in survival mode. But when we're caught, and right now there's so much in our modern paradigms that are about this mortality is all that we have. Scientific materialism. If you can't see it, it's not real. So then we become caught in survival of the fittest. And how do we preserve this physical life, but in a way that we then actually are fostering destruction and death?
You talked about the stories that we embed in our energy field. As we go through this ascent in consciousness, what do you feel will be the new stories that will then imprint into our energy field as individuals, as a species as well, that might shift those little outcomes? Because whatever story we play out in our mind is what we'll see in our outer world. How would the new story shift our new reality from then?
I love that question, and I'm excited to see how our cosmology will shift, how even our understanding of astrology will shift. Because part of my background before I got into psychology was in cultural anthropology. And it really taught me how, and this is how I really got interested in the precessional cycle too, because you realize every age is influenced by those stars here in the Northern Hemisphere rising at the time of spring equinox. And those archetypal energies then influence our paradigms, how we see the world, how we see spirituality, how we shape our cosmology. And as we're moving into the age of Aquarius, it is about the constellation who is the water bearer, pouring the waters of love and wisdom from the cosmos to the earth, guiding us into new paradigms. And I think it's significant as we're moving into the age of Aquarius that a lot of the Kuiper Belt objects that are being discovered are being named after ancient creation deities. We're reclaiming remembrance of the ancient wisdom and being guided to see things in different ways. And I think Eris Xena, that planet, is another guide trying to help us see things in different ways. But I think it's actually going to lead to whole new ways of understanding ourselves, our relationship with the earth and the sky, and ways in which we will remember our interconnectedness with everything. And I actually see it as being very likely that we're going to start, from an astrological perspective, understanding the planets in a different way, and perhaps even renaming them so they're not carrying the names of mostly Roman deities, very mired in the age of Aries, this time of separation, of conquest, of power over. Think about what it would be if Mars wasn't named after the god of war, but after some other mythic character about being in the hero's journey, like maybe Horus from ancient Egyptian mythology, or I also love Frodo from the Tolkien books. Think of how it would change our sense of Mars and our actions and how we move in the world if Mars wasn't named after the god of war.
Yeah. And on a symbolic level, right now, there's a whole movement of, entrepreneurs and scientists that want us to go and live in Mars, meaning that we're trying to escape the planet of harmony and balance to go to the planet of war because we've named it after, the god of war. What other planets would you rename that or reclaim in a new way that might shift our understanding of their archetypal energies and how they play into our daily life and, consciousness as a whole?
Yeah, in the class that I teach called Aquarian Shamanic Astrology, I love to try to reclaim the most ancient archetypal understandings that we have of the planets and the constellations, to try to reweave the sacred feminine wisdom, to bring those planets back into maybe more of a balanced meaning. And one of the ones that I'm most passionate about is Saturn. So Saturn, in this patriarchal paradigm, is seen as related to Chronos and time, constriction, associated with the energy of lead and of age and mortality. But part of what I love about exploring the planets from a more energetic or shamanic perspective is, what do they tell us about themselves? When I studied herbalism, we studied the law of correspondences, how the shape of a plant, its color, where it grows, tells you something about its medicine. So I apply that to the planets. So here you have Saturn, our outermost visible planet, at that threshold between visible and invisible reality. As a planet, Saturn is less dense than water. And it so resonates with the ancient Sumerian story of Inanna and Enki, the god of the sweet waters, the god of wisdom, who knows how to move between the worlds. So I see Saturn as our inner shaman, guiding us in how to move from the spirit realms into this realm, into form, and how to hold that lightly, and to know that ultimately then we will return to source. But to know how to move between the worlds and remember our true nature.
Yeah, that's a beautiful perspective. And what about the other outer planets that, all the astrologers now are saying that 2025 is going to be a year where the outer planets are going to be moving into different signs. What about Neptune? What about Uranus? What about even Pluto? Would you also want to reclaim in a new way from a shamanic perspective, which that was a very, very unique perspective. I never heard of anyone explaining a planet through shamanism. That was incredible. Thank you.
Yes, I think it does reframe our understanding of all the planets. And I also think that, part of what's important as we're moving out of the Kali Yuga, and part of what I think has kept us caught in some of these destructive paradigms is we got caught in the age of Aries, 2000 BCE to 0 CE, in that paradigm of the out of balance Mars, ruler of Aries, war, conquest, competition, destruction. And that carried over into the age of Pisces. And we need to heal that and clear that, reclaim the true meaning of Pisces to move into Aquarius. And I think a lot of what's going on with Neptune and Neptune's movement into conjunction with Saturn are trying to guide us into reclaiming the deeper mystical understanding of Pisces and support us then in moving into this shift into the Aquarian age. And part of what I think is important from an astrology perspective is our tropical zodiac chart got locked in time in the age of Aries. So all of our signs are caught back in time. And part of what I try to do now with a lot of my astrological interpretations is look more and more at visual astrology. Where are these planets actually in the sky? And what are they speaking to us by where they actually are, rather than being frozen in time in our tropical zodiac chart? So that conjunction of Neptune and Saturn that's coming, we see it as being at 0 degrees of Aries, that sign. But in the sky, that conjunction will be in the stars of Pisces. And I think that part of that conjunction is guiding us to reclaim that wisdom of the age of Pisces, that mysticism, that sense of our oneness with all that is, that coming from compassion to bring us back into balance. Here's how I understand it, actually, and this is, I think, some of the shift that we're in. I believe when we look at visual astrology, where are the planets and the sun and moon actually in the sky? They're showing us the energies at that spiritual level that are coming to us. And because we're still locked in the patriarchal paradigms, how they manifest comes through in the tropical zodiac chart, which is now more connected to the seasonal cycle than actually where the planets are in the sky. But I think as we move into the age of Aquarius, we're going to need to let go of being locked into that chart fixed in time in the age of Aries and come back into more communication, communion, relationship with the sun and moon and planets and where they actually are in the sky. So that conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in the sky will actually be in the stars of Pisces, which I think is calling us into grounding ourselves in that expansive energy of Neptune, ruler of Pisces, to come back into spiritual consciousness, come back into compassion, come back into the remembrance of our oneness with each other and all that is.
And if we're no longer trapped or stuck in time, how does that alter, the new age and how we see time itself?
Well, first of all, it helps us be back in the present moment instead of caught in these paradigms that keep us in the past. And then I think things will be unfolding in the age of Aquarius. I think we're going to move into a whole new understanding of time. And as we move into this dimensional shift into the fifth dimension, I think we won't feel locked in linear time the way that we've been in this third dimensional reality. And I think time and space will become more fluid. And I think we will understand the capacity of our consciousness to shift into different time frames, or, a lot of our galactic family move through the cosmos through their consciousness, not through third dimensional technology. And I think we'll have those capabilities if we allow ourselves to go through this evolutionary leap and move into this higher consciousness.
We might even get to see Lemuria again if we're moving out of dimensions.
Exactly.
Little field trip to Lemuria.
Exactly.
You mentioned the word carried over when you were talking about when we moved out of Aries into the age of Pisces, how a lot of the energies of Aries were carried over into Pisces, and now it's time to obviously let go of those. But what do you think are some of those energies that might be carried over from Pisces into the age of Aquarius now that we should be aware of, that we should look out for, that we should maybe understand? Like, it's almost a time of like intermingling of Pisces and Aquarius until we fully move into the age of Aquarius in the coming years. What are those energies that might be carried over?
So, that's a great question. So part of, I think, what happened with the age of Aries getting carried over into the age of Pisces is early in the age of Pisces, you had teachers like Buddha and Christ try to help us come back to our mystical understanding of the divine is within us. We're meant to come back to our hearts, come back to that sense of oneness. But instead of opening to that and healing and coming back into more of that mystical remembrance and awareness, the age of Aries carried over. We got into all these institutionalized religions and power structures and competition between religions and religious wars. It was age of Aries on steroids. And I think that we got caught then in an out of balanced age of Pisces, that instead of it being about mysticism, compassion, oneness, it became about addiction and delusion and illusion. And those are the shadow aspects of the age of Pisces that could carry over into the age of Aquarius and keep us out of balance in terms of being able to really integrate the wisdom and energies of the age of Aquarius.
What's the number one illusion that you're seeing playing out on the planet right now for people?
Wow, that's a great question. That we're still caught in that power over, conquer or be conquered belief system. But also, I think what's really unsettling is how much we're seeing in media, social media, a world of illusion and lies. That lack of ability to come back into what's really true. And I think, again, that's the shadow aspect of Pisces that could really keep us out of balance going into the age of Aquarius.
How are the lunar nodes shifting our perspective of reality right now? I know you've mentioned that we're going from the south node in Libra into south node in Virgo, north node Aries into north node in Pisces. What does that shift mean, on a collective level, and what can we understand more about that?
These are such great questions.
Thank you.
Because I've been thinking a lot about the lunar nodes, and they stay in those signs, whatever signs they're in opposite each other for about 18 months. So in January, they did move from being in Libra and Aries to Virgo and Pisces. Here's the interesting thing. If you think about, we're in this collective process of healing and transformation. How significant is it that the lunar nodes were in Libra and Aries? Like that, the lunar nodes call us into what we're meant to be working karmically, collectively. So they were, in essence, saying, South Node in Libra, come back into balance and harmony to heal and reconfigure your understanding of Aries and that age of Aries. Heal that. Now, we've got Virgo and Pisces trying to guide us back into balance with the age of Pisces energies. Remember that every age has its sub-age, which is ruled by the sign opposite. So the age of Aries was ruled by Aries, and then the second part of the age of Aries was meant to be balanced by the energy of Libra. Well, we kind of went right over that into the age of Pisces, and the sub-age of Pisces is Virgo. So as we're dealing with these lunar nodes, they're actually in this systematic way saying, okay, let's heal those out of balanced energies from the age of Aries. Okay, now 2025, halfway through 2026, let's heal these out of balance energies from the age of Pisces to then move into Aquarius, and Leo. Now we can move in a more balanced way into the age of Aquarius.
I feel that one of the greatest gifts of the youth is the power of ignorance in some way, or innocence, because we come into the world and we're just observing reality, especially for the younger kids that are coming onto the planet right now. And, we're seeing a world, or, people are coming into a world where there is still a lot of war. There is still a lot of chaos, separation, power structures. And a lot of people might be asking themselves as a younger, from younger eyes, why is there a war? And, I think it's really important understanding, that's where human psychology comes in to understand what causes war in the first place, not only from an astrological, archetypal energy, but in your expertise of clinical psychology, why is there war in the first place, and how is it even possible to eradicate that energy, from the planet going forward? What would we need to understand about our own psychology that causes these wars that can then, we can swiftly dissolve them and move into a different paradigm?
I love that your mission is to be supporting the young leaders who can bring in these new paradigms and guide us into these new ways of being. And I think so many are coming in already tuned to the new paradigms and the higher consciousness that we're moving into, which is very exciting. And I think that from that psychological perspective, yes, we get influenced by these different ages of the precessional cycle, but we could have worked that age of Aries in a very different way. I think the deeper archetypal meaning of the age of Aries is, let's each experience our individuality to find our unique gifts and expression of self, to bring that back into service in the world. That's the meaning of the Mars cycle, and what we could have experienced in that age of Aries with the sub-age of Libra. But part of what I've explored historically is there were a lot of earth crises going on, and Bibhu Dev Misra talks about this also, as we moved into the time of the Kali Yuga, and particularly around 3000 BCE. Some comet strikes, some climate changes, I think it triggered that fear of death and survival mentality, so that then we acted out in that trauma state and got caught in survival of the fittest and trying to seek our own safety and survival, even if it meant taking someone else's resources or conquering them. And again, once you're caught in that trauma pattern, we tend to perpetuate it. So then once you get caught in war or in that survival pattern, then it just keeps repeating, and you get generational trauma and ancestral trauma. And then we just keep being locked into those trauma patterns, which is what we're seeing around the world right now, and particularly in the Middle East.
Yeah, because in my understanding, Aquarius is also about individuality. My sister's an Aquarius, so I know she wants to be different than anyone else. And, it's funny because you mentioned that Aries was also a lot about that individuality. I feel like Aquarius is as well, but I'm having a hard time understanding the difference in how they express that individuality. Mm-hmm. And as we're moving into the age of Aquarius, how will we express our individuality without maybe falling into those patterns of war, of taking resources, of survival of the fittest, competition? How will that look different, based on the energies that we're working with in this new age?
Well, if you think about it as this journey of evolution of consciousness, so I think coming out of the age of Taurus, where we were really honoring the energy of our connection to the sacred feminine, to the earth, to community, Aries was helping us realize, okay, we're part of this interconnectedness, but what are our own unique gifts and sense of self? We've explored that in an out of balance way, but we've been exploring that. I think the age of Aquarius is about moving into this new understanding, not of I, but of we. So it is about understanding being in community, but community that fosters that sense of diversity and the uniqueness of each one of us, that we're each a fractal expression of cosmic consciousness. We're all a part of the oneness, but it is the expression of our uniqueness. Remember, the sign opposite Aquarius is Leo. What's my own unique light, creative expression, gift that I can bring into this new sense of community and interconnectedness with each other and all that is?
And what role does technology play into all of this?
That is such an important question. Because I actually see technology as the training wheels guiding us with the internet, with technology to realize our capacity to communicate with each other across distance, to be more a part of this global community. But it's meant to be a transition into the remembrance of what we're capable of with our consciousness. We're capable of being telepathic. We're capable of being in time and space in a more fluid way. But if we get locked into idealizing technology and staying caught in this paradigm of scientific materialism, we will be on a path, I believe, of self-destruction. And I think Greg Braden talks about that beautifully with his new book called Pure Human. That technology can actually, if we over-idealize that, it can block us from the capacity of our consciousness that we're capable of if we allow these solar and cosmic energies to be transforming us and reminding us of these gifts that we have with our consciousness that we have forgotten.
And I asked Greg the same question when we talked about pure humans, and I'd love to hear your response as well. And that is, what does it mean to be human in the Aquarian age specifically?
I think, we're in the mystery, we're in the transition. But I loved what I learned from the Peruvian shamans who talked about us becoming homo luminous ones, beings of light. I think that we will experience our bodies in a different way. I think we have this capacity to be in more expanded consciousness, to reconnect with our galactic family, to be in our humanity, but reconnect with not only the diversity of each other, but the diversity in our galaxy, and celebrate that and honor that awareness that we are all part of the oneness of cosmic consciousness, but in our own unique expression of that. My phrase to try to summarize the meaning of the Aquarian age is the sovereignty of the self in the sanctity of community, in unity with cosmic consciousness. That's what I think the new human in the Aquarian age will be about.
What does it mean to be in sanctity with community?
The realization that being in community is sacred, our communication, communion with each other, with the stars and planets, with the earth, with the life around us. It's all sacred. We humans are not somehow a superior being on this earth or in the cosmos. We are a part of this, the sacredness of all of life. And that part of the Aquarian age is remembering that everything is sacred.
That's how we started off this conversation, in a little prayer. Actually, before we move on to the round of the final trio, which we have, talking from the behind the scenes perspective, before we jumped on, we did a little prayer, and you brought in your guides, Isis and Thoth. I'm really curious when those two deities or energies came into your life, and I see a Isis necklace around your chest, and I'm just curious because we each have individual journeys of how we come across certain teachers or goddesses or gods or whatever we want to call them, but I'm curious to know what they mean to you, and if you would be willing to share that with our community.
I really found being in Egypt a transformational experience and really deeply connected with them then, and felt like they were reminding me that I had been in Egypt in ancient times in the past, and that part of my traveling there in this lifetime was to remember that and to come back into connection with them and their wisdom, to be in alignment with my path and purpose in this lifetime. So being in Egypt was profound for me in my own kind of process of initiation that way.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And Heather, we end every show with a segment called the Final Trio, which are little questions that we ask at the end. But before that, where would you send people to connect with you, with your work, with your courses, anything? We mentioned your book in the beginning, which is being revised. Where would you send people to dig deeper into all that you have to share with the world?
Both my website, risingmoonhealingcenter.com, and my YouTube channel, which is where I try to put out a lot of up-to-date information about what's going on astrologically, the lunar cycles, these shifts that we're in.
Yeah, that's how we found each other, on YouTube. So got to give a shout out to YouTube for bringing all these beautiful voices together, and also the community that is so engaged, more than any other platform that I've ever seen. The messages that come through, it's just like a wave of love, and I know that we're going to be receiving that as well in this conversation, because the love was very palpable. So thank you again for that. And I just wanted to ask you these few questions to wrap up. The first two are personalized to the guest, and then the last one we ask at the end of every show. So the first one is, what is the most profound cosmic or spiritual truth that you have discovered in your journey that you believe would shift humanity if fully understood?
Wow, that is an amazing question. Probably that realization of Sirius as our binary star and her connection to Isis. But also, I think if we deeply understand the galactic center and how it teaches us the integration of light and dark and honoring source and honoring that we are all coming from that oneness of cosmic consciousness, I think that would change everything.
Beautiful. The second question, what trauma that humanity has undergone in the past age would you want us to see, heal, and move beyond in this next age of consciousness?
Speaking of this age of Pisces,
Yeah. What trauma that we've come from the past or that we've had from the past would you want to allow us to see, heal, and move beyond?
I think it would be the trauma of the cataclysm 12,000 years ago. Both to remember why that happened, because it was humanity had gotten so out of balance, it becomes the corrective of the earth and the cosmos to help us kind of come back onto our path of evolutionary consciousness. If we could heal that trauma and how it's kept us caught in our fear of death and in this increasing sense of disconnection from source, from cosmic consciousness, I think we could remember who we truly are and why we're here, and then be much more open to the healing shifts that we're in right now and this movement into higher consciousness.
Yeah. And also just moving beyond that fear of cataclysm just means moving beyond the fear of death, because we have a greater understanding of who we are as eternal souls that are going through incarnations, and that there's also infinite parallel realities where we exist. So really, death is very much a real thing, and it's something to grieve, and it's something to cherish and acknowledge. But if we no longer fear it, then we can really move beyond into a blank canvas and then create this golden age that we're headed to. So
Exactly.
thank you so much for mentioning that.
Exactly.
For the last question of today, we call it the time capsule question, and it requires us to travel out a little bit into the future, around 15 to 20 years down the line. I chose out those time frames because I believe it's going to be a time when the young generations of today are going to be stepping more into leadership positions around the world. And just like any great leader, they've had great mentors, great resources, great teachings, great tools that have come before them so that they could be the greatest leaders that they could be. And you were given the opportunity to leave behind a time capsule for these leaders. And within this time capsule, you can leave anything behind that you feel would genuinely and truly allow these leaders to be the best version of themselves, to equip them with the necessary guidance, tools. It's almost like leaving behind that legacy of yours in this time capsule. And you don't have to put it into only physical objects. It could be non-physical. It could be an energy, a transmission, a frequency, even maybe a word. Whatever it is, this really just goes beyond any limitation. But what would you include inside of the time capsule for the next generation of leaders?
I love this question. So I've thought about it. I would leave two symbols. The symbol of the medicine wheel, which is so deeply a part of my own practice and has shaped my life in profound ways. But it's also at the root of every spiritual tradition. And the medicine wheel is such a template for holding that awareness of our interconnectedness with all that is, but ultimately coming to center and coming into our alignment with our soul self, with the earth, with the sky, with the center within us, our heart, and the center of the galaxy. And the other symbol I would leave is the triskelion, which dates back to Neolithic times and is that triple spiral. They're all interconnected, but it's the triple spiral indicating life, death, rebirth, that we're all a part of infinity.
Beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge these are just some of the few fields that you merge together. Psychology, astrology, shamanic practices, energy healing, mythology, ceremony, and ancient wisdom traditions. I know that there are very few people in the world that can merge so many different perspectives into one cohesive piece and model of reality, which you've so generously gifted to us today. And it's been such a gift getting to know you and your work. And you can just tell how much of the wisdom that you've studied, you've embodied as well. And you can genuinely share it from your heart. And it's definitely something that is felt. So thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to do this again. And I appreciate you so much. Until next time.
Thank you so much. And I want to say this has been such a deep and rich conversation, and I so value your depth and capacity to truly listen and be engaged in deep conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for taking us so deep. Thank you.
Great.